Hey everyone, welcome to Girls Can, a series of podcasts created to help educate and inform young women throughout the world.
Our goal is to empower and inspire the next generation,
because the girls of today become the future leaders of tomorrow.
Hey everybody, it's Grace. Today, we have a very impressive guest in the studio. Dr. Jennifer Feltman is an associate professor of art history at the University of Alabama, who specializes in the art and architecture of medieval Europe. In particular, she focuses on Gothic sculptural programs in France. Feltman is the author of the forthcoming book, Moral Theology and the Cathedral, Sculptural Programs of the Last Judgment in France, and the editor of two other books, The Long Lives of Medieval Art and Architecture, and The North Transept of Reims Cathedral, Design, Construction, and Visual Programs. She is currently a member of the Chantier Scientifique de Notre Dame, a team of scientists and historians authorized by the Culture of Ministry to study the fire-ravaged cathedral as it is being restored. As part of that research, Feltman is directing the NEH-funded project Notre Dame in Color, which uses 3D modeling to document, visualize, and interpret the meaning of the layers of paint on the sculptures of the Last Judgment portal of the Cathedral of Notre Dame in Paris. Welcome to the studio, Dr. Feltman. It's good to see you, Dr. Feltman. Thank you for coming on today's podcast.
Oh, thanks for having me.
So we're going to start with our first question. What started your interest in studying art and architecture?
Oh, it takes me back to childhood, probably. I've always loved drawing, and actually I grew up in Mobile, Alabama, and I went to a creative and performing arts magnet school where we did dance, drama, music. Art was one of my favorite subjects, also photography. And one of the things that I remember doing was walking around downtown Mobile and photographing buildings. Dunbar Magnet School is the name of the school, so it's not too terribly far from some of the historic buildings around Bienville Square. And I think that somehow influenced my trajectory. But, it's hard to say. It's always easier looking back to see the path. But when you're there, you're just enjoying the thing you're doing.
Wow, that's amazing. And then you used your art in your restoration with Notre Dame, right? That's amazing. So do you mind telling us how you got involved with that and how you use your art background to help you with that?
Well, sure. Well, first of all, I'm not actually physically doing the restoration. There are artisans on site, architects, engineers who are doing that. I'm an art historian. So as an art historian, what I do is I study the past. And in graduate school, I studied specifically medieval Gothic buildings and sculptures on them. I spent a lot of time learning about the history of them, how they're written about in history. And then I've spent the past 15 years or so traveling to France, where most of my work is based, and working both on the site and in archives. So, museums and libraries will have archives dedicated to the monument or object, where records are kept over time. The buildings I work on are ones that have been restored over many, many years. And so if you really want to understand what you're looking at, sometimes what you're seeing is medieval or the original Gothic building. Sometimes it's a restoration that's happened in, say, the 18th century or the 19th century or even more recently. So I really, after graduate school, got more heavily involved in that aspect of traveling to both look at the archives at the site. And then I should also say one of the things about studying the period I do, the Middle Ages, is that we don't always have all of the records. Sometimes the only record we have is the building itself. So that's really what's so exciting about the Notre Dame project. And I think you asked me how I got involved with that project. A lot of that has to do with having already been working on the ground, so to speak, with buildings in France, in particular the Cathedral of Reims or Reims. It's in the region of Champagne. It's where it's famous for being the site for coronation of the French royals. And it was also another building that was bombed or burned, where the roof burned. It was bombed in 1914 during the First World War. It entirely lost its roof and had to rebuild, similar to Notre Dame. They chose different techniques, interestingly, at the time. But because I had been involved with that, my colleagues in France knew about my work. knew about my interest in the long life of architecture, how it's restored over time. And at the same time, I'm also writing to them, asking about what's going on with the cathedral. And there was an opportunity to really be involved in contributing to the discussion on, in my case, the history of the sculptures of the cathedral.
That sounds amazing. And then also, why Gothic art and architecture? Because I feel like there's so many different aspects of that. Why did you choose Gothic in France and Notre Dame? Why was that your decision?
Well, my first experience of a Gothic building came when I was 18 years old. And really, I think that was the first time I'd traveled to Europe on my own. And I have friends in England. I visited the Cathedral of Gloucester. And when I walked into this building, I was like, wow, this is super cool. Mind you, this is before Harry Potter was a thing, okay? J.K. Rowling had just published the first Harry Potter book at the same time.
Oh, wow.
Later on, the movies will use part of that building to have the Chamber of Secrets. So the cloister around that building is from it. So
that is so cool.
So it wasn't really through movies that I got interested. It was through this experience of the space. And I thought to myself, how can I figure out how to do this as, as a job? How can I continue working in this area? At the same time, I was about to start college at the University of Alabama. I'm actually an alumni from Alabama as well. So I started out, believe it or not, I wanted to be an English major, but my parents, I'm a first generation college graduate. I had really high aptitude in science and engineering. And I had a scholarship from Kimberly-Clark Paper Company, where my father had worked for 30 years, that paid for 4 years of college. So I started in mechanical engineering as my undergrad degree. But I loved history and art. And ultimately, I ended up with a degree in interior design. How that happened is the courses we took in drafting in AutoCAD actually overlapped between the engineering students and the interior design students. They were in the same building. Some of the same teachers were involved. And I ended up getting hired to grade their papers. And then I was like, I want to take this class.
Wow.
So the engineering professor hired me to grade the papers. And then I started eventually to take the class, changed my major, got a degree in interior design. But ultimately, I knew I wanted to study something more ancient. And I was also interested in theology and history of a religion. And it just seemed normal to me. Why not study the Middle Ages and Gothic buildings? Because then you can do all the things you're interested in. You can study all of the things you're interested in. I was not really thinking about the economics of that decision at the time, but I'll say it's worked out. It's challenging, but that part has worked out.
Wow. So it sounds like you've always loved to travel too.
I haven't traveled. I didn't travel abroad to Europe until I was 18. I think I mentioned I'm a first generation college student. My family did travel a bit. And this may sound cheesy, but I did a lot of travel to Disney World. I actually don't discount Disney World at all, though. It provides these imaginative, immersive experiences of scaled architecture that are, really fascinating when you even study the history of how they've really thought about the viewer seeing something and creating of this stuff. It does not have obviously the same historical value that a monument in France does, but there are interesting overlaps between experiencing spaces that are designed at a place like Disney World, believe it or not,
That's so
and
neat.
some of the things that we find in the planning of cities. That said, there's certainly distances between the two things.
Mm-hmm. What's an example? I bet since you're an architect and you design things like that, you've probably noticed some things that the average eye wouldn't. So what's an example of that for Disney World?
Oh, geez. Well, I guess if you go to since we're talking about France, let's pick the France pavilion of Epcot, right?
Oh, wow.
You're familiar with Epcot,
Yes.
the experimental prototype community for tomorrow. It was actually, the whole thing was based upon the World Expo, which would have been things that happened in major cities like Paris and Chicago, where you had expositions that showed the latest technologies and developments. And these also would have the latest developments of different or ways to tell historical narratives of the countries. In France, if you stand, basically they've taken a mishmash of different historic monuments and squished them together. So you have the Palais Justice, and you have this kind of water fountain out in front of it, and the Eiffel Tower is squished into the distance. It's an impossible view to have in the city of Paris, but they've compressed everything and really used the scale of the architecture, which there are buildings or rooms at the top of some of the buildings that are obviously too small to be real, but the way your eye sees them from a distance, it all kind of looks like it belongs together. I mean, it's a bit like a stage set, really.
That's so cool. I would have never noticed that. That's amazing. I'm impressed. I guess they just teach you to notice certain things, but that's really interesting. So changing the subject a little bit, what is a typical day for you like?
I saw that question. A typical day. It really depends. One of the things I enjoy about my job is that I did not want to, be in an office where it was the same thing every day behind a desk all the time. That said, I do spend a lot of time behind a computer screen. I'm just doing lots of different things. Suffice it to say, no matter what job you do, you're going to end up using word processing programs and filling out forms and all of the boring stuff, emails and whatnot. But I'm often, as of late, I'm communicating with colleagues in France. I'm preparing for trips there where we might be specifically researching on site or at an archive or doing photogrammetry models. I also am the PI, that's the person that's in charge of a grant here at Alabama that's from the National Endowment for the Humanities. So as PI, I'm responsible for all of the budgetary and personnel management under that grant. So there are 8 people who have been funded through it. And I'm working with someone who's a specialist in 3D modeling. And, again, the days vary. One of my days this past summer, I was on site at the cathedral taking thousands of photographs of the west facade of the building. And I'm currently working with this person to process those. And in order to do that, we've kind of run into an issue of having a lot of data. The photos I shot were raw images. They're absolutely huge. And when you have 2,000 of them and run them in a program, it's very taxing on the machine. University of Alabama has recently gotten a high performance computing network system, and we're setting up our program on that. So I'm also working with computer scientists and the departments that are in charge of that at the present moment to get ourselves onto the system. And at the same time, figuring out how to pay for the new software, which was not originally budgeted for, but looking for grant funding here or there. I'm also writing an article that's due soon, actually 3 separate articles that I have to finish in the next 3 weeks. So I break up my time between answering emails, planning, budgetary things, writing, researching. Rarely am I just sitting with an open book and reading, which is something I would love to be doing. But oftentimes my day is broken up into these chunks. I'm also a professor at the university, so we're getting ready to teach students. So I'll have a new crop of graduate students coming in. Well, some of them are returning graduate students, but I'll be teaching a graduate seminar on Gothic sculpture. You can see me right now. If you see this pile of books on my desk, these are the books I need to go through and select all the readings for their seminar, scan them, and have them prepared for their course, and go over all those things. And I believe they start on the 22nd or very soon, just a week or so away. So, and then, I meet with students, I write recommendation letters, I talk to them about their future career plans, what courses they'll take next semester, and all of those things. Faculty wear lots of hats.
Wow. I'd just like to start off by saying congratulations for being chosen for the group of 8. And also, do you sleep? Because you do so much. You're so accomplished. So congratulations for your selection.
I have a 5-year-old, so
oh no!
when she's finally asleep, I sleep.
You're the ultimate balancer. I mean, that's impressive. Congratulations. I'm impressed.
I'm not sure about that, but yoga helps.
Yoga, yes. I have not tried yoga, but maybe I will, because if you say it helps, then I think it definitely will. Okay, so our next question is, what do you love most about your job?
What do I love most about my job? I guess the freedom to pursue the ideas that interest me. And also I'm realizing more that we get to create new ideas and push ideas forward through our research. I think that's one of the things that's different about a research faculty member is that they're not simply just teaching what people have said in the past before, but they're able to read that, digest it, and dialogue with those people, sometimes correcting, sometimes digging deeper and finding out new information. And as of late, I've really, really loved collaborating with scientists across, disciplines and looking at the ways that they approach the material I study, and then also bringing my perspective as a historian to their scientific work. I think there's an interesting kind of synergy that comes from that.
Wow. Thank you. And then on the contrary, what do you like the least?
Grading papers.
I bet your classes are pretty big too. How many papers do you have to grade?
No, I can't complain. I don't have very large classes. Interestingly, the University of Alabama has 40,000 undergraduate students, but my graduate seminar, I think I'll have a maximum of 14 students in the course.
Oh, wow.
We have a lot of personal interaction with students, though, so because of our smaller numbers. My lecture courses, I think the most I might have is 34 in a lecture course, but that's quite intentional at the University of Alabama because we have, even though we're a large university, there is a sort of mandate to have certain smaller courses to create this deeper connection with students. I primarily teach the upper level courses. So by the time that I see a student, they're usually a junior or senior. Occasionally I might have a sophomore who's taken a lot of coursework, and then also graduate students who are, wanting to work in the field.
Wow.
So yeah, the 14 student class, a lot of my time will go into like helping them think about doing research, guiding them in that research, helping them formulate or thinking about how they formulate research questions, where to find the answers to them, and also sometimes sitting with the idea that you won't find the answer, but how do you still accomplish writing the 20-page research paper that's required, and teaching them about the discipline and what we do in the field. That's a lot of what we do in the graduate coursework.
So what advice would you give to your young females in your community and some of your students?
I would just say, do what you love doing. If you find a thing that you love to do it. If you have an idea, don't be afraid to express that idea. If you're in a class where there's an opportunity to have a discussion, be bold, but also be, reasoned in your contributions in the class. There should always be some content there, of course. If I could share a little personal reflection in thinking about, I never really, and this may sound strange, but I never really thought about, okay, I'm doing this as a female. That never crossed my mind growing up. I just did the thing that I was interested in. I think society over time layered that on to me. Mm-hmm. And obviously this happens to us as from young women and as we grow older because our bodies change and we are seen differently. But I think a lot of my attitude probably came from the way my father treated me, not differently than any boy. He involved me when he was rebuilding a 1957 Chevrolet. I was out in the garage with him learning about an intake manifold and how all of the pieces were put together. If he had a construction project where he was putting a new roof on a garage, well, it may not have been safe and we might have different ideas about it now, but I climbed on the roof with him. And maybe that's why I'm not afraid to climb on scaffolding, using the certain safety measures. But I'm also interested in being up close and personal with the people who are doing the work, the not just the intellectual side of looking at the archives, but also seeing the nitty gritty side of how things are made, how they're constructed, and realizing those two things have to somehow come together when we're seeing a major monument be made, or even a house, or a garage with a roof that needed to be replaced.
Wow, that's so sweet. So who is your inspiration and why?
This is a really hard question. I don't usually sit and think of specific individuals, but I think, if I think back to the past few years, it's probably easier for me to answer that question. it's divergent from my field, but I have been very inspired by medical doctors over the past few years as we've gone through the COVID crisis, and as really the whole world had to face an entirely new way of existing. And I watched medical professionals, nurses, doctors, the whole lot go into that. I'm sure they had fear, but they did their job day in, day out. They have incredibly demanding schedules. And so I know several medical professionals who did that work. They were incredibly inspiring. While we were going through COVID, the Notre Dame restoration is also happening. So interestingly, some of the individuals who were involved with that restoration, who, again, these are the kind of boots on the ground people. One of the head archaeologists is a woman, Dorothée Chaillou-Derieux. She has been in the dirt, in the building, day in, day out, finding amazing things, reporting about it, and she even got to carry the Olympic flame in front of the cathedral just a few weeks ago. So that's super cool to me. And people who are able to make those kind of discoveries, and it's also an incredible amount of pressure for people. I think everyone who's been involved with the Notre Dame project, we were all just normal people, doing our job day in, day out. And then this big thing happens. And I call it a little bit Notre Fame, because it sucks, the building sucks you into its aura and everyone's interested in it. And now all of a sudden you're being interviewed and you have to change, you have to think about a public side of the work that you do. And I've watched many of my French colleagues also do this in their media. Dorothée is one of them, and others who I've been involved with, Stéphanie Duchesne, the chemist who I've been working with on pigments on the facade, has also, all of a sudden, the job that you're doing day in and day out becomes the essential thing for preserving an important monument. And so I've just been inspired by my colleagues, and there's a communal sense of like, we're doing something together that I think also helps people. It's like running a race or running. You run faster when you're with people. Somehow working out is better for me, at least in group settings, because I'm not just out there entirely by myself. Mm-hmm. Maybe there's a psychology to that also applies to the work we're doing.
Mm-hmm. It sounds like you and your colleagues have done a lot. Which of your career accomplishments makes you the most proud?
Again, not something I think about a lot. What's the strange thing about our field is that we're always working and we feel like we still haven't accomplished the thing yet. But of course, it feels really good when you write the article and it gets accepted, when you have the book and it gets published, and you see the thing in physical print. So the book I edited on the north transept of Reims Cathedral, to be able to get the colleagues from France and America into the same room to have a discussion and then to be able to edit that, I'm very proud to have seen that into its physical form. I will be incredibly proud to see my book, which was my dissertation that I've spent more than a decade working with, in physical form, hopefully coming in the next year. Of course, being involved with Notre Dame, it's a bit like a dream. I'm proud of the work, but I do feel as though it's a bit like you're getting to do something that I'll only really recognize the significance of it maybe later on, because we're so deeply in the moment of. But it's an incredible honor. It's also a burden, I feel, mm-hmm. to get it right, and I think that's another reason why they always say pride comes before the fall, but it is important to be proud of your work, but it's also, you've got to keep focused on what's coming next too, I think.
Mm-hmm. Tell us a little bit about your book. What's your favorite and what are they about?
Oh, well, the north transept of Reims Cathedral, it's about this cathedral that the roof, burned in 1914, I mentioned earlier, but it gets into a problem that I ran into when I was working on my dissertation. I'm working on sculptures. And so one of the thing that I focus on primarily in my research are the doorways that you walk through into major churches, cathedrals, for example. And they might have hundreds of sculptures, individual figures carved in limestone, typically placed around the upper portions. We call those the voussoirs, or arches around the opening, the tympanum, the lintel. Then you have these massive jamb figures, and they might also be changed multiple times over time. And so this particular facade or face of the building, if you see it at France, it doesn't look like it was all planned to go together, and it wasn't. And so I was interested in trying to figure out when it was changed, why it was changed, how we can know that. And as I discovered, I didn't think I could entirely answer the question on my own as an art historian. I needed to know what was beneath the ground. So I needed to talk to the archaeologist who had that information. I was also interested to see what clues could we find in the stained glass windows that are above, because they have to be put in at a certain point, and could they provide us some chronology? So I needed to talk to the stained glass specialist. And I needed to also include the people who were doing the history of the particular period, and who also worked on other sculptures, and people who knew about how sculptures were carved, so we could tell, was this made perhaps in the 13th century, or did it get recut in later periods, or is that stone, we might have to talk to a geologist to find out if that stone is the same as the original stone, or is it one that they used in a later period. So it gets a little bit into the weeds, but that's the North Transept book. My book that's coming out, Moral Theology in the Cathedral, it's kind of a heavy book, a heavy topic. It's about the Last Judgment, which is, of course, a Christian theological concept of justice at the end of time, when good things are rewarded, bad things are punished. And this emblematic image is really developed in this period of time. And, I was interested in knowing, well, why are they so focused on that theme in this 13th century? It becomes one of the major themes. And interestingly, of course, you have lots of crazy demons and hell imagery and resurrections of bodies and that sort of thing. But interestingly, the overall focus seems to be on the potential of salvation in the period, and in the empathetic intercession of Christ and the saints. And so I was interested in those concepts, how they were working theologically, but also how were sculptors realizing these and bringing them into physical form. And we tend to think of the Renaissance being the period, and the Italian Renaissance being the period where realism became a thing. In the period where I'm working, which is the 13th century, just a few centuries or so, give or so, before the Italian Renaissance, they are beginning to look to classical art and to revive forms in sculpture. They're not necessarily making portraits, but maybe some things are portraits. They're beginning to make realistic figures. And I am just really drawn to three-dimensional media and to interactive spaces. When you walk inside of one of these portals, you're not quite inside the church yet, but you're already enveloped into this dialogue with other bodies. And because they're actually sculpted bodies, your body interacts with them, especially if they still were painted and had eyes painted in. There's some kind of effect that happens there. But all of those things just fascinate me. And so the moral theology in the cathedral book really it's about how the education of clergy gets translated into sculptural form, and this the way that happens at different sites, basically in a region not too far from Paris. 1220 to 1240 is the title. So it's a 40-year window that I'm mostly dealing with.
Wow. Well, that's very interesting. Thank you for sharing. And anyone listening, feel free to check out her book and read some more about it. So thank you. And then our final question, since you seem to love reading and writing and exploring, what book should all girls read before they go to college?
I never chose a book because I was a girl. I know that sounds strange, but I never thought of it that way. I just read a book that I was interested in. The kinds of books that interest me are mystery novels, theology, and I also like science fiction. But most of the time I would, watch some science fiction like, Star Trek or something like that. But C.S. Lewis was one of my favorite authors to read, and I particularly enjoyed the book Mere Christianity as a teenager. And really reading through some of the space trilogy that he wrote, I think is also kind of fascinating use of, I guess, science fiction to deal with real world issues. I like a lot of nonfiction as well. And it's hard to point to a specific thing, but I like reading biographies about individuals. Strangely, I enjoyed baseball biographies as a child. Hearing stories about Lou Gehrig or Babe Ruth, I don't know why those appealed to me, but it was my goal to read every baseball biography. I think I know why they did it. My first interest, which did not happen, was to become the first woman baseball player. So that would be one place where I thought about being a woman, because I was not allowed to play baseball of it, and instead played softball. Yes, I spent an entire Saturday crying about it, but
missed opportunity.
I know, right? I love the aesthetics of baseball, the uniforms, the field, and everything. But I ended up pitching softball and was a slow pitcher. And then in high school, it changed to fast pitch. So I changed positions to second base.
Well, you do have a really cool job. So I'm glad it worked out the way it did. So
it did. The one place that skill has come in handy is that we have a kind of community group of faculty who play softball together. And, we've stopped playing because we've all injured ourselves, a little bit. Once you turn 40 something, your body speaks to you in new ways. But through team sports, I've been able to make, even as a professional now, doing things with my faculty colleagues out in the community, I have connected with people outside of my field in ways that I normally wouldn't. So I do think that, those sport activities are really important, not only as children, but into our adult lives.
It sounds like your job is also a team sport too.
It is. I mean, there is that sense that it's a team sport. You also have to make decisions and, figuring out who's doing what and, resolving things when problems happen and celebrating when you have victories. There's a lot of things we can learn from athletics.
If our audience wants to learn more about you or your upcoming book, where should they contact you?
So you can find information about my research on jfeltman.com. I also have there linked several projects that I'm working on, but the major one that's involving faculty across the university and in France is called Notre Dame in Color. And there's a website, NotreDameInColor.org, that lists our different team partners and who's involved with that. So, feel free to follow us there.
Thank you so much for meeting today. It was lovely to meet you.
Nice to meet you too. And I wish you the best. Thanks again.
Thanks so much to everyone for listening.
This has been Girls Can, a podcast and an organization dedicated to improving the lives of young women in our community.
We want to encourage young women to make a difference through education and service.
Because the girls of today become the future leaders of tomorrow. Because the girls of today become the future leaders of tomorrow.